And welcome back to the Wellness Paradox podcast. I'm so grateful that you've joined us on this journey towards greater human flourishing. As always, I'm your host, Michael Stack, an exercise physiologist by training and a health entrepreneur and a health educator by trade. And I'm fascinated by a phenomena I call the wellness paradox. This paradox, as I view it, is the trust, interaction, and communication gap between fitness and wellness professionals and medical professionals. This podcast is all about closing off that gap by giving our fitness and wellness professionals the skills and the tools that they need to lead long and fulfilling careers, helping people stay healthy. To do that, in episode 40, we're joined by Dr. Tony Moreno. And the topic that we're going to discuss is around physical literacy. And this may seem like an odd term for those of you who haven't heard it before, but as Dr. Moreno will define very early on, this is the competence and the comfortability with being able to move throughout the lifespan as a cradle to grave concept. And as Dr. Moreno will talk about, fitness and wellness professionals have a critical role to play in this concept of physical literacy, all the way from very young kids to very, very elderly adults. And I think this conversation represents an amazing opportunity for fitness and wellness professionals, as well as for the health and fitness club industry to truly become viable stakeholders in the healthcare continuum. Indeed, our facilities are places to effectuate physical activity and physical literacy. And that's exactly what we're going to explore in this conversation. Any information we'd like to share from this episode can be found in the show notes page by going to wellnessparadoxpod.com/episode 40. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Dr. Tony Moreno. Today, we're delighted to be joined by Dr. Tony Moreno. Tony, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Mike, for inviting me to participate in your podcast. This is important stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I've known Tony for a very long time. He was actually the person that gave me my first academic teaching job. So I owe a lot of thanks to, I either owe a lot of thanks or a lot of blame to Tony, one or the other. But this podcast is an important discussion for us to have around this topic of physical activity and physical literacy. But before we get into that important topic, why don't you just give our audience a little bit of an idea of your background?
Sure. I'm currently a professor of kinesiology at Eastern Michigan University. I've been there since 2004. Spent a couple years at Albion College. I specifically teach courses in biomechanics. So many of our students that are going into those allied health professions, such as physical therapy, physician assistant, orthotics, prosthetics, but also those students that go into sport medicine, cardiac rehab, a number of those types of disciplines. And that's kind of where I'm at right now. I do a lot of consulting work. I've consulted with USA Lacrosse, USA Hockey, USA Ultimate. So I've done some work with the USOPC as it relates to long-term athletic development and physical literacy. I also consult with the Michigan Fitness Foundation. I'm actually on their board, and I'm also on the Governor's Council of Physical Activity, Health, and Fitness at present. So I've got my hands pretty full. And one last thing, I've been consulting with the Michigan High School Athletic Association for 20 years as it relates to again, long-term athletic development and sport medicine and injury prevention, those types of things. So I've been pretty busy since I've spent my time here in Michigan since 1998, but I'm originally from Southern California. Don't ask me what I'm doing here, but
fair enough.
No, Michigan is a great place. I wouldn't change a thing I've done. But that's kind of a little bit about where my background lies, Mike.
Yeah. And the interesting thing that I'll also add to that, because we've talked about it before, is you do also have a background in commercial fitness. In a previous life, you were in the fitness industry. And so you know a little bit of what the struggles and the joy that some of the people that are listening to this podcast deal with on a day-by-day basis.
Absolutely. And just so your audience knows, again, before my life as an academic, I did work for a company called the Sports Connection in Southern California. And I did everything you can possibly do. I was a program director. I was a fitness manager. I was a personal trainer. got my hands dirty there. I was actually an operations director for LA Fitness when they only had a few clubs in Southern California. I had 5 clubs underneath my name in Southern California. So I spent some time as an operations director. I worked for the Los Angeles Athletic Club as a fitness director for a number of years. And to top that all off, I just got tired of working for people. And I actually had my own fitness center, gym, in Mammoth Lakes, California for approximately 5 years in the early to mid 90s. So I know what it's like to be in the health and fitness industry from pretty much every perspective you could think of, Mike. I've done just about everything you can do except teach fitness aerobic classes and things of that nature. I'm not a yogi or aerobics instructor, but you name it, I've done everything and just about seen everything you can possibly see in a health club or a gym.
Yeah. And that's why I've always appreciated your perspective so much, because you've been in the front lines, you've been in other places. As we were talking before we came on the air, now you're more looking at the big picture and overall strategy and population health. And that's what this discussion is going to get into. And we're going to specifically talk about physical literacy, which you and I are familiar with that term, but I think that when people first hear it, they're kind of taken aback because there's not the concept that they normally hear associated with literacy. So for starters, just a level set, let's define physical literacy for our audience.
Sure. So let's take a step back and let's look at literacy. A person that is literate, a person that is capable of reading a lot of material, whether it be Wikipedia, comic books, novels, magazines, we would consider that person to be literate because they can read and be comfortable reading the content of numerous types of reading materials. It's very similar to numeracy. So there are some people that are pretty good with differential equations, calculus, trigonometry, algebra, addition, subtraction. That's what we call numeracy. But they have this ability to deal with mathematics in a variety of contexts. Now, what physical literacy is it relates to movement. And so the easiest, simplest definition I can provide your audience is it's that competence, confidence, understanding, and motivation to be physically active throughout the lifespan. And so the key word in that definition is competence. It helps to know how to move, to be able to participate in a number of physical activities in a number of environments. And it's that competence that gives me the confidence to go out and participate in new activities or existing activities or whatever it might be. And lastly, it's a cradle to grave concept. It's a journey. It's not a destination. There are people in the academic world that would argue that we need to measure physical literacy. But the difficulty right now is there's really are no measurables as it relates to physical literacy. Really, the best measurable that we have is, are you physically active? Mm-hmm. Do you enjoy it? And are you planning to participate in physical activity throughout the lifespan? So that's the basic bare bones definition of what physical literacy is.
Yeah, and that's great. And I think that's a great level set to this discussion. And it begs the question, because we often talk about this in academic terms, how literate from a reading perspective are our kids and our adults. It kind of begs the question, how are we doing with regard to our physical literacy in this country and specifically across that lifespan?
Well, what the trends have indicated through a number of national surveys and databases and things of that nature, what the trends are showing is that we tend to be or becoming a more physically inactive country, which would tell us that we're becoming more physically illiterate country. So that's kind of where we're at right now. And kind of going back to what you said earlier, when we talk about reading as it relates to literacy, at what level does your child read? Do they read at a 3rd grade level, an 8th grade level, or a 12th grade level? What level of mathematical accomplishment can you do algebra? Can you do trigonometry? Can you do calculus? Physical literacy is a little bit different. And the reason that I say that, as I said earlier, movement competence, fundamental motor skills, are vital. They're important, but they're not the only thing that's important, because it's kind of hard to argue. Does a person who doesn't know how to throw and catch a baseball or dribble a basketball, but does enjoy things like surfing and rock climbing, are they any more or less physically literate than somebody who is a professional baseball player or professional basketball player? The answer is no. So there are no specific measurables there. The key thing here is, are they physically active? How much time do they spend enjoying physical activity, and what are the breadth of physical activities that they enjoy participating in? So we don't have a specific measurable, but what we do know, what the databases and the trends tell us, is that we are becoming a more physically inactive culture, and as a result, we're becoming more physically illiterate.
Now, it's easy to say that, well, technology, Zoom, all these factors that we commonly hear cited is the reason for the decline in physical activity. But I suspect that it's not that simple. It's nothing that's complex like this is ever that simple. What's your view of the underlying causes, plural, of what we're experiencing beyond the kind of standard perfunctory answers that people give, like, hey, there's Zoom and there's an iPad? Sure.
Obviously, we have technology to make our lives easier, and a consequence of that is that we just don't have the same caloric expenditures, getting up and changing the channel on your television. If you don't remember those days, I certainly do. Getting up to answer the telephone, walking out to the mailbox, all those things have been taken from us. So we obviously, as a biological animal, we don't have the same opportunities for energy expenditure in our activities of daily living. However, that said, for me, what I believe the biggest culprit is, and really there are two. One is, we have a generation upon generation, actually, that does not have the opportunity to exhibit the same motor skills or movement opportunities as the preceding generation. And much of that is tied into physical education for our youth. If a child or a teenager or young adult, if they're not exposed to these movement opportunities, where are they supposed to learn how to move? At home. And sometimes that can oftentimes be difficult. You have both parents that are working and they're gone a good number of part of the day, and they don't have the opportunity to play with their child. So we call it a movement proficiency barrier. If you don't have those skills to hop, skip, leap, jump, throw, catch, swim, think about what impact that has on your opportunity to learn or acquire various physical activities or sports or recreational activities and things of that nature. So one is that movement proficiency barrier. That's something that definitely I feel has played a large role. And the other is, our lifestyles, as they've been kind of prepackaged almost. We prepackage things in a way so that they become mundane and maybe not so enjoyable. But the number one reason that people don't typically participate in an activity, particularly a physical activity, it's not enjoyable or it's not fun. And I think we've gone away from that. We've gone away from this idea that we need to exercise in a prescriptive way. Well, yeah, if you have an unhealthy population or a physically illiterate population, well, yeah, people are going to start to prescribe exercise, some level of cardiorespiratory fitness, some level of resistance training, some level of mobility, whatever it might be. But what's lost in that is making sure that those activities are fun and enjoyable, because if they're not, people are not going to participate in those activities. So first one is that movement proficiency barrier. We need to address that. And how we address that has to be done in a manner or a way in which we can give people the opportunity to have fun and enjoy participating in a health club, in a gym, in a community rec center, in a camping ground, park, whatever it might be.
Yeah. And when I hear movement proficiency, and I think about proficiency with reading, you develop that in your formative years as you're going through school. And I'm curious to get your thoughts on where this is breaking down. Is it the lack of physical education classes we have in school? Is it that sports are getting much more competitive and exclusive at a young age because competition is more important? Is it other factors? What's causing that to break down?
Well, a number of things. We have less opportunity for physical education and physical activity in the school setting now in 2021 than we did in, say, 1980, 1975, 1970. These are things we've been talking about close to 50 years now. We know what the problem is. We know the trends have continued in the same direction for close to 50 years now. And there's always talk about, administrators, legislators, policymakers, when they open their elected and appointed mouths about wanting to have impact on mental and physical health and well-being of their constituents, we should really see how effective they are at enabling opportunities for physical education, physical activity, and physical literacy. And that's kind of, and I understand that, there's limited amount of funding, limited amount of money, limited types of things. But again, there's always a consequence when you eliminate something and when you take away, again, physical education, or you slash the budgets for community parks and recreation, or you restrict or close access for people to facilities where they can participate in recreation or physical activity. You're enabling the opportunity for them to not want to move or not have that ability to move. So we got to ask ourselves as a culture, as a society, what do we want? And what I hear, all the time is, increasing healthcare costs, increasing mental health issues that we see among schools and in children and even adults. We're talking the talk, but we're not walking the walk. We know what to do. And I've had this conversation with you before. We know what to do. We're just not doing it.
Yeah, it's such an interesting paradox there. And I'm going to ask you the impossible question to answer, but I've known you long enough to know you'll come up with a good answer. Why aren't we doing it? When it's so obvious and we've been talking about it for so long and we see the implications of it? Why are we such an easy scapegoat in terms of removing the resources that we need to help our kids and our adults move?
Well, Michael, I'd like to give you the easy answer, but it's really multifactorial. We need to give children the opportunity to become physically educated. And again, I've explained that this is how we overcome movement proficiency barriers. If I know how to run, hop, skip, leap, catch, throw, swim, that it's like a buffet that just opens up a whole buffet of movement opportunities for me to participate in. But if I don't have that and I don't have it at home, where am I supposed to get it? And so sometimes as a parent, you stick your kid and you put them in t-ball or you put them in little kickers or whatever, and you hope that your child or your young son or young daughter will take on to that activity and whatever it might be. But now we have a youth sports system, $1 billion industry, by the way. We have a youth sports system that is quite competitive and it saps a lot of the fun out of it. And here's a term that should be very scary for people in the physical activity realm. You have club sport and you have rec sport. Okay, you've already created a class society for participation for youth. Club sport are people that are shelling out dollars for their kid to get quality coaching, quality competition, access to excellent facilities. Rec sports, usually community rec. It's a volunteer parent. Facilities aren't kept very good. And the quality of competition is definitely lower. So we've created a class society just in youth sport. So when kids don't have that positive youth sport experience, well, why would you participate in sport? If you have a movement proficient barrier and you're not comfortable moving in front of your friends or your peers, well, why would you want to move? So those are some ground level things as it relates to youth. But your youth someday will become young adults, and those young adults will become elderly individuals. And like I said, physical literacy is a cradle to grave concept. But if we're not learning to move at a young age, that grave comes a lot sooner than later. So that's one approach, and I'm pretty adamant about, addressing the issues with youth and youth sport and things of that nature. It's a little bit of my background. The other big reason, Mike, is there are so many organizations that I said earlier that are talking the talk. And I'm not going to name specific organizations, because there really is no blame. I think what the real issue is, people need to talk to each other. Yeah. And I'll give you a case in point. At the national level, we have several initiatives. You have Healthy People 2030. You have the National Physical Activity Alliance. You have Project Play. You have the National Youth Sports Strategy. These are all national initiatives that are subsidized by the government, or acknowledged by the government, or they are organized by professional organizations. And they're very interested in publishing their white papers and their review of literatures and their policies. And in all of that, it's almost like a competition between these organizations. They all get caught in their individual silos. And ego becomes the enemy here. And because ego becomes the enemy, they don't talk to each other, even though they have the same vision, same mission statement. They don't talk to each other or collaborate with each other to create some form of collective impact. We don't have that collective impact that we've had, that we need to turn this ship around. So that is the other thing that's the other prong that needs to be addressed. How do I get people from different organizations to talk to each other so that moving forward, we can provide similar programming or share ideas, work together so that policymakers and legislators can perhaps subsidize funding or opportunities where it's needed in the community, whether it be physical education, parks, community parks and recreation, the private sector, wherever it might be. We need this directed strategic approach to get organizations to work together.
Yeah, absolutely. And for it being a multifactorial problem, you did a really very good job there of distilling it down into some of the levers that we need to pull. And that's where I kind of want to move next. And we've identified the problem. It's a complex problem. And certainly our 45-minute conversation isn't going to solve that problem, but maybe it can illuminate how certain stakeholders can be involved in moving the needle. And I've always believed, and I know you believe this too, that solving complex societal problems involve both a top-down and a bottom-up approach. You need both. And specifically on this podcast, we have fitness and wellness professionals that are very passionate about making people more active and more physically literate. I think a lot of people are going to enjoy that term. And let's start with that stakeholder group. What can that group of movement professionals start to do to move the needle on our physical literacy issue?
Sure. And I cannot emphasize this enough. And I hope your audience appreciates this and embraces it. But fitness centers, gyms, community recreation facilities play a central, and I'm capitalizing every letter in central. They play a central role in providing facilities and offering programming that can help enable and perpetuate the physically literate journey. You got to remember that these kids, if they are physically active, if they are physically educated, if they are participating in sport, if they are participating in other recreational activities, these kids are going to become young adults. And these young adults are going to become adults, and they're going to become older individuals. There needs to be a venue to help perpetuate physical literacy. Fitness centers, community rec centers, and gyms play a central role in helping to perpetuate that physically literate journey. So, and again, it's a journey. It's not a destination, but it's a venue for both young and old to learn new and or maintain various forms of physical activity. Think of all the various forms in place now. You've got resistance training, martial arts, swimming, aquatics, rock climbing, boot camps, yoga, adult sport leagues, et cetera, et cetera. That's where these venues help people like myself. For me personally, Mike, I enjoy weightlifting.
Mm-hmm.
I enjoy hiking 14,000 foot peaks. I enjoy playing handball. I enjoy playing pickup basketball. So to do all of these things, it's really important for me to participate in resistance training, to keep my cardiorespiratory fitness, to enhance my mobility. And so I cannot emphasize enough how central the health club industry, fitness, gym industry, community parks and rec is so critical to perpetuating physical literacy. And that should be, if I had my gym right now, Mike, if I was still a gym owner, I would use that and I would ride with that as one of my main marketing pieces.
Yeah. And you and I have had many conversations about this, and then hopefully we're working on some initiatives to advance this cause, at least a little more in the state of Michigan. I get the sense, though, just from being in the industry for a while and looking around, and you very much the same way, that we're not doing the job that we could be doing as an industry right now to be this safe and inclusive venue for the population at large. Just look at the statistics. Only 20% of the American public goes to a gym or a fitness center. With that said, what do we need to start to do as an industry, or at least start to consider either in action or in messaging or whatever it may be, to move us towards being this venue for physical literacy and physical culture?
Sure. And so, when you say that 20%, we know that 20% are probably among the physically literate.
Mm-hmm.
They're perpetuating that journey. So that the key issue is, how do we get that other, if it's ever possible, how do you get that other 80% or 60% or 50% or whatever it might be to be a part of this type of program? How do we drive that needle? Well, for the past 45 years or so, we've been scaring people, right? We scare them. You need to exercise. You need to, perform, the ACSM guidelines 3 to 5 times a week for, 20 to 60 minutes. You need to do X amount of resistance training. You should. Everything has been a prescription. Everything has been exercise. Everything has been medicine. Nobody likes to take medicine. Sometimes medicine tastes awful, doesn't taste
Mm-hmm.
good. So I think one of the things that we can do, again, kind of going back to, if I had a gym, if I had a fitness center, I would go back to this idea of, how do I make it so that going to the gym or to my club or what it might be is more like recess. It's more like it's fun, it's enjoyable, and I like socializing with the people that are there. And is that type of programming really available now in the fitness industry? I'm not expecting an answer from you from that, but is that type of programming that really steers people to make it an enjoyable, fun, social, participatory experience, is that really there at the fitness center or at the gym right now? Or is it still, you walk in on your own and you got your little card and you record your workout, or you look at your phone, or you do your cardio in isolation with your headphones on? But those people are going to do it anyway. The people you have in your gyms and fitness centers now are going to exercise anyway. They're going to find a place to exercise. The people in the pandemic that lost access to their gyms, they found a way to move. They found a way to exercise. It was the people who are on the fringe, or the people who didn't do anything at all. Those are the people that we have to try to reach. And so we need to ask them. Maybe we should ask them, what do you like to do? What type of physical activity do you like to do? What would be fun for you to do? And how do we provide that type of programming in the fitness center or a gym or community recreation or what it might be? But I think when we talk about moving the needle, whatever we've been doing up to now is not working.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and what we've been doing has been very prescriptive. It's been very much in alignment with medicine, the medical industry, instead of play, fun, recess, that type of approach or that type of attitude. And I would say, I forget that quote by Albert Einstein. If you continue to do something, maybe you know the quote better than I do.
Yeah, it's the definition of insanity is continuing to do the same thing over and over again, expect a different result.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So we do this. We try to do the same thing, right, over and over again, and it's just getting worse.
Yeah.
Right. We don't have more people participating in physical activity in 2021. We have fewer people than in 2019 or 2017 or 2010 or 2000. Fewer. So the insanity needs to change. So I would say, again, I would look myself in the mirror. I would look at my facility. I would look at my programming. That's what we can do at the grassroots level. But at the macroscopic level, again, it's getting those organizations we need to do better messaging as to what physical literacy is, and ask ourselves, are you physically literate? And if not, how do we find those things that will encourage you to want to participate in physical activity?
I'd like to take a quick break from today's episode to tell you a little something about one of our sponsors. As all of you are well aware, addressing the wellness paradox is a lifelong passion project for me. And when you're going to go on a long journey, it's difficult to go it alone. You need to find like-minded individuals that are willing to go on that crusade with you. And that's exactly what I found at the MRF Institute. The team over at the MRF Institute creates educational content for fitness and wellness professionals who are serious about becoming a part of our healthcare continuum. Getting on the healthcare continuum is all about leveling up our skills to be looked at as that valued resource provider. The wellness paradox is certainly an avenue for you to do that, but we need many different levers to pull if we're going to get there. And the MRF Institute is definitely one of those levers. You can go to their website, mrfinstitute.org, to find all kinds of great, informative, free informational content. And if you choose to engage with any of their paid content, they've created a coupon code specifically for Wellness Paradox listeners. You can enter in WP 2022, that's WP, and then the number 2022 to the website at checkout to receive a 15% discount on your purchase. I highly recommend you go check out mrfinstitute.org. Now back to today's episode. Yeah, I love when you use the term recess. That's probably the term that gets me most excited that you use. You've used the term adult recess before, and it's just such a perspective shift on what exercise is, because what kid didn't love recess? Like, you got out, you weren't doing work, it was fun, it was playful, you had all kinds of options on recess in terms of what you can do and who you could do it with. And it's such a great metaphor. And I think that, as a point to take away for all the people who are listening, like, if we could start to think of things more like recess and less like medicine and less like treatment and prescription, I think does at least start to move the mental needle towards something that's a little bit more approachable.
Yeah. I mean, again, it's the number one reason people drop out of physical activity and sport. Not fun. The number one reason they jump in, it's fun. I mean, there's plenty of literature on this. So I'm not going to go that path, but it's very, very simple. And so our approach, our models, whatever it might be to help turn that needle, should probably look at that a little closer.
Yeah. And there are other stakeholder groups here too. And I just want to hit on these two really, really quick, because I think we can't have a complete discussion without talking about these two other groups. Although I think our audience got a very good answer to what we just said. There's lawmakers here, and there's also like our youth sports system that I know you're heavily involved in, and pick whichever one you want to start with, but just briefly, what should our lawmakers be thinking about in terms of trying to support this, and what should our youth sports systems in this country be thinking about in terms of supporting the journey of physical literacy?
Well, I'll start with the youth sports system, because that's the easier of the two, and it's the easiest one because, again, it just comes down to movement proficiency barriers. If children have acquired pretty good motor ability, acquired pretty good fundamental motor ability, and again, all those fundamentals, hop, skip, leap, jump, throw, catch, tumble, dodge, evade, whatever it might be. If you can do those things, you can pretty much pick up any activity. You have the club sport system, and so you have sports or activities that have a high technical ability. Sports like basketball, you have to know how to dribble and shoot. Soccer, you have to know how to dribble. Hockey, you got to know how to skate and use the stick. If you don't have things like balance and coordination and agility and speed and some level of strength, it's difficult to participate in those types of activities. But what about the rest of the kids? What about the rest of the youth? And we really need to think about programming. And again, this is a venue where I think certain health clubs and community rec venues can play a major role introducing children or youth to novel sports such as ultimate frisbee or team handball that don't have the same type of recognition or popularity, yet they're a place for kids to learn those skills and master those skills and maybe create their own youth leagues around these types of sports or activities. So we talk about youth sport, youth in general, the movement proficiency barrier. We need to find mechanisms to overcome that. Physical education, vast majority of kids go to school. School setting is a great place to learn how to read. It's a great place to learn how to master mathematics. It's a great place to learn how to learn about science. Should also be a great place to learn how to move. And so when we talk about convincing policymakers and legislators and lawmakers, we need to offer that venue for that. And I'll just go back to what I said earlier. When they open their mouth about, I care about your health and your physical and mental well-being, well, Mr. Lawmaker, Mr. Legislator, the first thing I'm going to look at, what's your record on subsidizing or supporting what it is that we're doing in school for our kids? Because those are going to have long-term effects. And so, lawmakers, legislators, most of them don't come from a background like you have and like I have, Mike. They're not going to understand. And this is our fault as a field, as a discipline, as an industry. This is our fault. If we don't put it in a language they can understand, it's going to go right over their head. They're not going to understand it. They're not going to follow through with it. And this is the way it's been for the past 45 years. We need to take what's out there and we need to put it in a simple language that they can follow and they can understand. So legislators, lawmakers, policymakers, all those individuals can help us to get to where we need to go. That's critical. And then the third piece is, again, this goes back to the organizations, MFCA, Michigan Fitness Foundation, Michigan SHAPE, MISHCA, which is the Health Coordinator Association, Michigan Department of Education. We all need to talk to each other and come up with the same plan and the same vision and approach our lawmakers and legislators and say, look, this is where we're headed. This is the trajectory that we've been following for the last 40, 50 years. We need to change this. So movement proficiency barriers, opportunities in the community, and getting organizations to kind of work together. These are three things I think of right off the top of my head that need to happen and fairly quick.
Yeah. And hard work, but important work, certainly.
Yes.
I liked what you said earlier, and I just want to circle back to it really briefly. You talked about the role that health and fitness clubs can potentially play in closing that gap that exists between the kids that are playing the club sports and the rec sports, and then the kids that are playing no sports because they're not interested. Just really briefly, do you have any thoughts on what that would look like operationally? Like how could a health and fitness club provide a program to those less active youths that aren't engaging in sport at the club or the rec level?
Yeah, I'm one of those people, Mike, if I'm going to talk the talk, I got to walk the walk. And so what I did during the pandemic, I have an LLC. There's still a bit tinge of an entrepreneur in me. I created an LLC where I do some creative and consulting work as it relates to youth sport, physical literacy, and things of that nature. So I approached community, and I came up with what I call a sport agnostic camp. And what I mean by agnostic, it was just many different sports. And we did trash can lacrosse. We used trash cans. I went down to Home Depot and bought some Rubbermaid trash cans, and we used those as goals. I went over to Walmart and bought some frisbees. And we ran camps where we introduced kids to ultimate frisbee and what we call trash can lacrosse, and introduced some basic concepts of dynamic warm-up and mobility, and a little bit about health and wellness and nutrition. Now, I'm doing this as a private sector guy, not as an academic. But I approached the city. I went to Parks and Recreation and said, I have a plan. Because in many cases, many of these parks and recreation facilities and organizations, again, they're not going to have a background in physical education. They're not going to have a background in exercise science. They're not going to have that background. So those of you in the private sector, you're bringing a unique skill set to those venues, and you can offer programming that they can put out there to the community. And you work out, you can work as a subcontractor. I subcontracted. They handled registration. They helped me acquire fields on offsite type of things. I just brought the programming. And so it was a win-win. So the community wins, Parks and Recreation wins, parents win, kids win. And if you're on the ball as a owner operator, you win. This is all win, 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 win.
Yeah.
But this is a very simple example of somebody, your facility or any facility really can reach out and offer programming that community recreation doesn't know how to offer. And it's like any other business. You got to look for those things that other people are not providing but want. And parents during a pandemic, when kids are online all day and the kids are going nuts in the room and all this other stuff, offering opportunities for movement and physical activity and sports, it was a godsend to many parents. So that's one example of what somebody could do with community recreation. The same can be done with physical education. Physical education is offered in a variety of ways among school districts. Sometimes it's 35 minutes once per week. Sometimes it's 50 minutes twice per week. It's really all over the place. But again, physical educators, and I think we're seeing fewer and fewer physical educators. Now we're teaching teachers with a liberal arts background or a mathematics background or an English background to come up with some type of movement plan for kids and calling that physical education. That's not right, because I know that these individuals don't have a background in the movement sciences, physical education, or exercise science. So again, there are opportunities for collaboration with the private sector, with schools, to offer programming that is unique and different. And, at best, actually running the program, at worst, serving as a consultant. So I think that these are areas that gyms and fitness centers and things of that nature can really make a push to make impact in the community. Because again, if this is Applied Fitness Solutions that's offering these programs at, Salem High School or some middle school or whatever it might be, now you're becoming a face in the community, and that helps businesses to a great degree.
Without a doubt. Yeah. And I love that. And I love the simplicity of what you did. You didn't get out the Gopher catalog and spend $10,000 on equipment. You went to Walmart, got some Frisbees, you went to Home Depot, got some trash cans. And it was about the programming, not the complexity of everything. And I think that's such a great lesson for everyone that's listening.
Well, the reason that I made it, so where I'm trying to find here, but I made it very, not every community has great resources, as you know. And so I wanted to create something that can be transplanted in communities where they don't have a lot of resources. I think a trash can, I forget what a trash can costs, maybe 14, 15 bucks. Frisbee's 99 cents at Walmart. There's all kinds of different places you can buy supplies. But I wanted something that could be placed in communities that are in need or don't have those resources. They don't have the budget allocation for those types of resources. If you can work with that, you can work with anything, right?
Yeah.
So that was kind of my approach, and I wanted to make it affordable, because again, when you look at the youth sport landscape, much of it is not affordable. But again, I'm just one person in a vast ocean of issues and problems, but I'm just trying to create, in my mind, solutions that might have a direct impact on my community, and how clubs and fitness centers can do that in their immediate community.
Absolutely. And you kind of hinted at it there, but this is a complicated problem. This is not, there's not a single fix or a single solution to that. And it's kind of daunting. And I acknowledge that, and our audience will acknowledge that, but I'm also the eternal optimist. And I think you very much are the same way. What gives you hope that we can address this challenge that we're faced with?
Well, that's a great question, Mike, because I never, for me personally, you're an entrepreneur. Okay. You don't think of failure, right?
No, not particularly.
Anybody who's a successful entrepreneur is the perpetual optimist.
Yeah.
Right. So I started as an entrepreneur. So I have that perpetual optimism, and I do get the gloom and doom from many of my colleagues and people throwing up their arms and the frustration and giving up and those kinds of things. So, I just got to say, for me personally, I'm just the perpetual optimist, and I'm a persistent person. And it's really tough to answer your question, but I think that there's always hope and faith in the human race to do the right thing. And I think we're learning a lot about ourselves coming out of in the midst of a pandemic. We're learning a lot about ourselves and how important it is to be healthy, both physically and mentally, how important movement is, and to find alternatives for movement in our environment and in our setting. For decades, we've been put in packages and boxes and containerized. And now you get this pandemic. It's kind of like taking everything in the sandbox and shaking it up and throwing the toys all over the place, right? And so here we are trying to pick up the pieces and reorganize. But optimism is going to be dependent upon people like yourself, people like myself, our fellow gym and fitness center owners, our fellow physical educators, our community recreation programmers. That's where the optimism lies, because they wouldn't be doing what they're doing if they're not passionate. You have to have ambition, you have to have purpose, and you have to have passion. APP. I've always said that's the best app you can have: ambition, passion, and purpose. And if you can get the right people on board to do that and to work together, and this is where I'm at right now, getting organizations to work together so that we can go to our legislators, go to our policymakers, go to administrators with one unified voice and vision to convince them that it's important to create a physically literate culture. And gyms and fitness centers, I can't emphasize enough, are a critical piece to that. I hope I was convincing earlier in how I mentioned that.
Absolutely. There's so much information on this, and there's a lot of great stuff out there. I'm keen to have you maybe point our audience in a couple of directions. Where can people go to find out more, maybe about some of the things you're doing, some of the information we talked about? We'll link up to all these on our show notes page, but if there's just a couple you could tell us about verbally, that'd be great.
Yeah, I'll provide some links. I think a good place to kind of look at the big picture is to kind of understand what is physical literacy. Again, if I'm a fitness center owner operator or a gym owner, how do I use this word physical literacy to market my services or to give myself greater presence in the marketplace? And so there are a number of position papers you can find on physical literacy. So I'll definitely provide those links. But the National Physical Activity Alliance, NPAP, or plan, National Physical Activity Plan, NPAP, that's one organization or group of organizations, primarily in the allied health sciences, that are working together to promote physical literacy, physical activity. Healthy People 2030 is another initiative put forth by the Department of Health and Human Services, supported by the Department of Health and Human Services in the United States government. So those are a couple places that people can look at. Project Play, as it relates to youth, Project Play, or the National Youth Sports Strategy. All of those will make mention to this idea of physical literacy. And I mentioned Healthy People 2030, and I kind of get a chuckle out of this every time. There was a Healthy People, Healthy People 1990, Healthy People 2000, Healthy People 2010, 20. Now we're on 2030. Why do we keep having to have healthy people? We're not making any progress because we're all we know what the problem is. We're all yelling out the window that we need to do something, but nobody's doing anything. I was in one of my meetings with a bunch of national organizations and group. I go, we got to make this the last healthy people 2030. We don't need a healthy people 2040. I mean, how long is this going to go? It's crazy. But I will definitely provide a number of resources for your viewers and listeners to kind of check out to get more information on this concept of physical literacy. It's a great marketing piece.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I could talk to you forever on this because I am very much has the same perspective as you, but I want to bring us to a close here with the question that is the thesis of what this podcast is all about, which is getting fitness and wellness professionals to be part of the larger allied health or healthcare delivery system in this country. And we've talked about many different things during this podcast. We're not there yet for lots of reasons, but I'm curious from your perspective as someone that looks at this as a person who's almost wore every hat in the industry, how do fitness and wellness professionals bridge this gap and actually become part of healthcare? How does that look in your mind? If there's one piece of advice you can give, what would it be?
You definitely have to be part of the community, and again, there were some things I alluded to earlier, working with community parks and recreation, working with schools, working with other organizations in the community. But we need to embrace those frameworks and concepts that will position us as an important player in providing healthcare and physical activity opportunities to all Americans. And between you and I, we know we're an important player in that to do that. But we need to yell a lot louder. We need to kind of get out of our comfort zone. I know we all wear the hat of entrepreneur, and I hate to beat on these examples, but I lived in a ski resort, Mike, of 3,000 people, and the next two closest towns, one was 50 miles away and the other one was 30 miles away. So those 3,000 people, that's what I had. And I competed with I had 3,000 square feet. I competed with a 30,000 square foot full service gym in my ski resort. But long story short, I had to do guerrilla warfare, right? I didn't have the same budget. I didn't have the same staff. I didn't have the same facilities. And the fitness industry, gym industry, health club industry, you have to do guerrilla warfare. And what I mean by that, it's like guerrilla marketing. You got to reach out to the hearts and minds of the people. Those are parents. Those are people in schools. Those are people who participate in community recreation programs. And it just becomes an adjunct of your business. And when you reach the hearts and minds of those people and they understand, collectively, again, hopefully we get the ear of those policy and decision makers to understand how important and how vital the private sector, health clubs, and the fitness industry is to helping maintain a healthy, both mentally and physically, a healthy population and a physically literate culture. I mean, who does not want a physically literate culture where everybody has that competence and confidence and understanding and motivation to move throughout the lifespan? Who doesn't want that? So I'm an optimist, you're right. But we need to win the hearts and the minds of the people. And if we get in our own little shell and we just operate as a business and internalize ourselves, it's going to make that path more difficult. We need to get out there and work with the people.
Well said. Dr. Tony Moreno, thank you so much for joining us on the Wellness Paradox.
Thank you, Mike. That was a handful. And thank you for having me. As you can see, I have a lot of passion for this.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Dr. Moreno as much as I did. If you found it insightful and valuable, please do share with your friends and colleagues. Any information we'd like to share with you from this episode can be found on the show notes page by going to wellnessparadoxpod.com/episode 40. Please be on the lookout for next week's episode when it drops on Wednesday. And if you have a moment, please leave us a review on your favorite podcast platforms. Those make such a difference for us. Until we chat again next week, please be well.